The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, a vast dome of shifting lights and floating holograms that depicted the known universe. Delegates from 100 species sat in their hovering platforms, their voices melding into a cacophony of clicks, growls, and electronic modulations. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Elias Voss, the last representative of Earth. He had seen this moment coming for years, yet the weight of it pressed down on him like a planetary gravity well. Chancellor Zyros of the Zevran Dominion, a towering insectoid being with crystalline mandibles, raised a clawed appendage to silence the chamber. The murmurs faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. His multifaceted eyes regarded Voss with something between amusement and contempt. "Ambassador Voss," Zyros intoned, his voice reverberating through unseen speakers. "The Council has deliberated on the matter of humanity's place among us. The decision is final." His mandibles clicked in what humans had come to recognize as a smirk. "Your species is to be exiled." The words, though anticipated, struck like a physical blow. Voss's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain composed. Humanity had fought its way into the stars, survived the bureaucratic gauntlet of the Council, and proved itself time and again through ingenuity, resilience, and sheer willpower. Yet, none of it mattered. The old species, the ones who had ruled the galactic core for millennia, had never truly accepted Earth as an equal. "You claim we are a threat," Voss said, his voice measured but firm. "Yet humanity has never waged war against any Council species. We have contributed technology, trade, and, when requested, our finest soldiers to defend your borders." Zyros let out a clicking laugh. "And that is precisely why you must go. You are unpredictable. Dangerous. The Council cannot abide a species that thrives on conflict, even in the name of survival. The balance must be maintained." Another delegate, a serpentine member of the Varan Ascendancy, slithered forward on its platform. Its voice was a whispering hiss. "Your world will be demilitarized. All human fleets disbanded. Your colonies outside Sol will be abandoned. You will be confined to your home system, and under no circumstances will you be permitted to expand again." A lesser diplomat might have begged. Voss only nodded once. "You fear us." It was not a question. Silence. Then the whispers began again, rippling through the assembly. The truth had been spoken aloud, undeniable and raw. Even those who had once called humanity allies did not object. Fear had won. The Chancellor waved a claw dismissively. "Your transport The Galactic Council had grown complacent in its perceived victory. For years, they had assured themselves that humanity, stripped of its fleets and scattered to the fringes, was no longer a threat. They whispered in their grand halls that the exile had been just, that they had secured peace, that the unpredictable species from Sol had been tamed. Their mistake had not been in underestimating humanity's strength, it had been in assuming they would never need it again. The first attacks came in the silent reaches of space, far beyond the Council's core worlds. Entire stations vanished, their distress beacons transmitting only seconds before they were swallowed by fire. Merchant vessels disappeared along trade routes that had been safe for centuries, their shattered remains drifting in the void as a grim warning. The attackers were swift, brutal, and methodical. At first, the Council dismissed them as pirates, the usual rabble that lurked beyond civilization's edge. But as the reports grew, as the casualty list swelled, the truth became undeniable. The Drazan had returned. For centuries, the warlike species had been a footnote in history, driven into the darkness after their failed attempt to conquer the core worlds. They were a race engineered for war, towering, reptilian beasts with armor-plated hides and weapons fused to their very bones. Once thought extinct, they had instead been biding their time, watching, waiting for the moment to strike. Now that moment had come, and the Council's fleets, built for show rather than war, crumbled before them. Grand Marshal Zyros, the same Zevran who had once stood in judgment over humanity, watched in cold silence as another star system fell. Holographic projections flickered before him, depicting Council ships burning, planetary defenses overwhelmed, and the Drazan banners rising over worlds that had once considered themselves untouchable. He curled his mandibles in frustration. The Council was losing. The assembled delegates spoke in panicked tones, their voices rising in a cacophony of fear. The Varen hissed about retreating further into protected systems, while the Oserak, a species of towering crystalline beings, debated abandoning the outer colonies entirely. None spoke of fighting back. None knew how. The Council had spent centuries ruling from a place of untouchable authority, securing peace through diplomacy, trade, and, when necessary, the quiet elimination of threats before they could grow. But they had forgotten war. They had forgotten what it meant to fight against something that could not be reasoned with, something that sought not negotiation, but annihilation. And so, the whispers began. Not of surrender, not yet, but of an option so distasteful, so unthinkable, that none dared speak it aloud at first. The thought festered in the minds of the ruling species, twisting and growing until, finally, it became a question. A desperate, humiliating question. Would humanity answer if they called? In a hidden base on the fringes of known space, Adrian Kane watched the incoming transmission with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The Revenant's bridge was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the amber glow of status displays and the faint blue hue of the transmission feed. The Galactic Council's emblem, a swirling constellation of interconnected systems, flickered before him. "They're begging," said Commander Elise Rourke, her voice edged with amusement. The dark-haired strategist leaned against the console, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Didn't take as long as I thought." Kane exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving the screen. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize the barely restrained panic behind the Council's formal request. They were losing, and they knew it. This was not a diplomatic summons. It was an admission of fear. "Let them sweat," he said at last. The message looped again, the precise wording carefully constructed to maintain the illusion of control. The Council had not directly asked for help. No, that would be beneath them. Instead, they had phrased it as an opportunity for humanity to reintegrate, to prove themselves worthy of trust once more. As if they had a choice. As if they had not already made their decision the moment the Drazan had returned. Rourke pushed off from the console, pacing. "We have the fleet. We have the firepower. And let's be honest, we've been waiting for this moment." She turned to face Kane, her expression sharp. "The question is, do we make them pay first?" The bridge was silent as the unspoken weight of her words settled over them. Humanity had spent years rebuilding in the shadows, gathering allies from the broken, the exiled, the forgotten. Their technology had advanced beyond anything the Council had seen before. Their soldiers had trained for a war that had been stolen from them once. Now it was at their doorstep, and they held the power to decide how it would be fought. Kane leaned forward, resting his hands on the command console. The Council had called them dangerous once. Now, they feared they had been right. "They need us," he said at last. His voice was steady, resolute. "But they don't deserve to dictate the terms." A flick of his fingers sent a return transmission, brief, direct, undeniable. "We will answer. But this time, we set the rules." The Galactic Council's desperation was evident in the speed of their reply. There was no pretense of negotiation, no carefully worded conditions. They had tried to cage humanity once, and now, with the Drazan at their gates, they were willing to grasp at any salvation offered. The message that came through was simple. "Tell us what you need." Adrian Kane stood in the war room aboard the Revenant, staring at the holographic projection of the Council's failing defenses. System after system had already fallen, entire fleets obliterated. The once mighty rulers of the Galactic Core had been exposed for what they truly were, unprepared, afraid, and incapable of fighting a war they had convinced themselves would never come. Now, they were paying the price. The Revenant was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol. Across the hidden colonies, among the exiled, the betrayed, and the forgotten, its name was whispered with reverence. Humanity had not spent its exile licking wounds. It had sharpened its teeth. "They gave us everything we asked for," Commander Elise Rourke said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Full strategic control. No oversight from the Council. They even unlocked restricted military zones for us." She scoffed. "They know they've already lost. We're just here to decide how much of their territory survives." Kane exhaled slowly, fingers tracing the edges of a battle schematic. He had known the Council's fleets were fragile, but the scale of their collapse was worse than he had anticipated. The Drazan had carved through them with surgical brutality, their forces operating with the cold efficiency of predators who had been waiting far too long for their prey to stop running. His officers waited for his command. They had all suffered, all lost something to the exile. None of them had forgotten. None of them had forgiven. The Council feared them now, but that fear was a tool, a weapon to be wielded. The question was whether to save them, or let them burn. He turned to the gathered officers. "We move on Axion Prime first," he said. "It's their last major military stronghold before the Drazan hit the core worlds. If it falls, the war is over." Captain Lennox, an older veteran with a face lined by too many years of conflict, grunted. "If we go in, we don't just stop the invasion. We make a statement." His gaze was cold, calculating. "The Council needs to understand that this is our war now, not theirs." Rourke's smirk was sharp. "Then let's remind them." The fleet mobilized. Within hours, dozens of ships, silent ghosts that had lurked in the void for years, converged on a single point in space. The vessels were nothing like the outdated models the Council had stripped from humanity during the exile. These were predators, sleek and lethal, outfitted with weapons and technology that had been developed in the shadows, beyond the watchful eyes of the galaxy's rulers. They moved with purpose, slipping past the crumbling front lines of the Council's defenses like sharks through water. The Drazan fleet at Axion Prime was vast, a wall of warships bristling with weapons, their hulking forms blotting out the stars. They had expected a slaughter. The battered remnants of the Council's forces were already in retreat, their last defensive lines shattering. Victory for the invaders was inevitable. And then humanity arrived. They did not announce themselves. There was no diplomatic transmission, no warning shot. The first sign of their presence was a rupture in space as dozens of stealth ships decloaked in perfect formation, unleashing a synchronized barrage of kinetic weaponry. Drazan vessels erupted in fire and debris, their hulls torn apart before they had even realized an enemy was among them. Precision strikes severed command ships from their escorts, engines were annihilated with pinpoint accuracy, and communications went dark as targeted electronic warfare crippled their ability to coordinate. The Revenant led the charge, its railguns tearing through the enemy's front lines with merciless efficiency. Kane stood at the helm, his expression unreadable as he watched the enemy falter. The Drazan had never feared the Council's fleets, had never hesitated when tearing through their forces. But now, for the first time, they recoiled. "They're adapting," Rourke observed, studying the battlefield as the enemy attempted to regroup. "Smart. But they're not fast enough." Kane gave the order, and the second phase of the attack began. Drop pods streaked through the void, breaking through Axion Prime's upper atmosphere like a meteor shower. Human soldiers landed in the heart of the besieged capital, their weapons cutting through Drazan warriors with ruthless efficiency. This was not a desperate last stand like the Council's forces had fought. This was an execution. The enemy broke. The proud conquerors who had ravaged world after world now found themselves hunted. As the last of their ships attempted to retreat, human warships pursued them, showing no mercy. And just like that, the tide of the war shifted. By the time the last Drazan vessel was reduced to drifting wreckage, the Council's battered survivors had begun transmitting their messages of gratitude, their voices thick with relief. Kane ignored them. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The ruins of Axion Prime still burned when the final transmission from the Galactic Council came through. Across the shattered skyline, the last remnants of the Drazan lay in heaps, their armored bodies broken and lifeless. Humanity had not just won the battle, they had sent a message. There was no misunderstanding what had happened here. The old order had crumbled, and in its place stood something far more dangerous. Adrian Kane watched the holographic display flicker to life in the war room of the Revenant. The Council's delegation appeared, their faces drawn with exhaustion and barely restrained fear. Grand Marshal Zyros was among them. His usually imperious posture slightly bowed, mandibles twitching as he searched for words that would not doom them further. "We acknowledge your decisive victory," Zyros said carefully, choosing each syllable like a man walking through a minefield. "The Galactic Council is prepared to formalize your reinstatement, to welcome humanity back as an equal power among the stars." Kane exhaled slowly, his gaze unreadable. The offer was expected. The council had no other option now. With the Drazen routed and their fleets in ruins, they needed someone to hold the line. They needed humanity. The irony was not lost on anyone aboard the Revenant. Commander Elise Rourke leaned against the console, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with amusement. "That almost sounds like an apology," she mused. "Almost." Zyros stiffened but did not take the bait. "The past cannot be undone," he said, voice clipped. "But a new future can be forged." Kane studied him, considering. Once, these same rulers had cast humanity out, certain that they had stripped them of their ability to rise again. Now, they stood before him, offering their surrender in everything but name. 4 years, humanity had lived in exile, sharpening their weapons in the dark, waiting for the moment to remind the galaxy of who they were. That moment had arrived. He leaned forward, his voice steady, final. "We're not here to ask for a seat at your table." His words cut through the silence, deliberate and unyielding. "The council is over. You ruled because you believed you could not be challenged. You were wrong." The delegation shifted uneasily. Some opened their mouths to protest, but Zyros silenced them with a gesture. He had expected this. "What are your terms?" Zyros asked. Kane met his gaze. "Simple. Humanity leads the war against the Drazen. Unchallenged. Unrestricted." He let the words settle before adding, "And when the war is over, the galaxy does not go back to the way it was." A heavy silence followed. The meaning was clear. The old power structures, the illusion of the Council's authority, the fragile peace maintained through quiet oppression, it was finished. Zyros hesitated, but he was a soldier before he was a politician. He had seen what had happened at Axion Prime. He had seen what humanity was capable of. There was no negotiation left to be had. At last, he bowed his head. "Then it is yours." The transmission cut out, leaving only the hum of the war room's displays. The bridge crew stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Rourke was the first to speak, a slow grin spreading across her face. "So that's it. We win." Kane stared at the galactic map before him, the countless systems now standing at the precipice of change. This was not just a victory. It was the beginning of something far greater. "The war isn't over," he murmured. "Not yet. But it would be. And when it was, the galaxy would remember. Humanity had returned. And this time, they would not be cast aside.